I'd like to talk a little more about this image, third stream, because it has really taught me a lot. Some images come together quickly, some are harder work, and this was a lot harder work for me. And the reason, what stumped me, was the area in the center of the image is very soft. Now this is something that is inherent in the scanning process. Unlike a camera and lens where in best situations we can control the amount of focus, the depth of field, and we can have the entire scene in sharp focus if we want, the scanner is meant to record something flat. So when I'm asking it to record something dimensional, I'm not going to get very much sharp. In many cases, that's what I really like, because the rapid fall off into softness accentuates the sharp areas, and it's part of what attracts me about the scanning process. But in this case, there was that softness right in the center. And all my training, my F64, even my F16 training said, you gotta have the center of your image sharp. And for a while, I couldn't get past that. Everything else worked. I liked the arrangement of the parts in the image. I liked the tonality, but that darn softness. Finally, I decided, just disregard those rules for a little bit and look at this on its own terms. And at that point, I was able to work it through and resolve it. And it's really a favorite one for me now. I was at an exhibition last year, and someone was looking at this image with me, and he said, oh, that reminds me of Sumato. Does anyone know what Sumato is? I can't see if any painters are raising their hands. Yeah? Okay. What I learned, because I didn't know either, it is a painting term, and it refers to the definition and form in painting without abrupt outline by blending of one tone into another. And I'm a real believer in the fact that I can learn from all different art forms, and I thought that that was wonderful that that person saw this in my work. So, have you all figured out what my object is? Someone yell it out. Paper. Paper. Okay, was it obvious a really long time ago? So it is paper. It's usually text weight, a plain white sheet, sometimes pulled out of my recycle bin. And as I started working with the images, it seemed like the perfect blank slate for me. And I could roll it into coils, I could fold it into accordions, I could make all sorts of little sculptures with it to do my scans. As I started showing the work, two different camps of people emerged in their responses. Some of them didn't like seeing paper detail, and as you look at the images, you'll see some that I think are more recognizable and some that are less. And so this first camp didn't like to see the detail, and so preferred images such as these, because seeing the detail brought them back to reality, and they didn't want that. They wanted to just contemplate. And then others were exactly the opposite. And they liked the paper detail because it was an entree into the image for them. So I took all this in, and really the lesson from this experience for me is that no matter what my intent is with my work, the success and the understanding of the image has everything to do with what the viewer brings to it. And it will be different for every person. I'm fascinated about how a single object, the paper, can assume an array of surface qualities and suggest even other objects based on how the scanner records it and how I combine it in my images. In this one, I think the coil of paper on the left suggests fabric and drapery to me. In the next one, it's kind of metallic and even looks like a leaf form. Mm-hmm. It's all paper. So this same sheet of paper, depending on its form, how I folded it, and its interaction with the scanner light can be a starting point for an architectural, geometric image such as this one, or an organic bimorphic one. In Illumitones, I'm very interested in ambiguity of the background and the foreground, elements interweaving and not necessarily resolving as expected in the image. I think leaving questions unanswered keeps the viewer interested. This ambiguity is a central question to abstraction. How much of an image can be removed and have the composition hold together? How much information does the viewer need to be drawn into the picture? I got to thinking about this when I was reading a marvelous book called Proust Was a Neuroscientist by Jonah Lehrer. This is the cover. It's a great book to carry around. You can see Proust is very large in the title, and people see it and they're impressed and they say, "Oh, you're reading Proust." I never tell them I'm not. In this book, Lehrer writes about artists from the 19th and early 20th centuries, writers, painters, composers, poets, even a chef, who have discovered essential truths about how the human mind and brain work through their art. And their current findings have been substantiated by current neuroscience. And in this book, Lehrer writes about both the art and the science. In particular, I'm fascinated with the chapter about the painter Cézanne. Cézanne, in his later work, reduced his paintings to mere gestures. Landscapes that he had once painted in more detail, such as the one on the left, became just dark strokes on a white canvas, with the strokes representing the outline of a mountain, for instance. Lehrer says that in his canvases, Cézanne wanted to give the brain just enough to decipher, not a brush stroke more. If his representations were too accurate or too abstract, everything fell apart. The mind would not be forced to enter the work of art. That last statement I find pivotal. The mind would not be forced to enter the work of art. And isn't this what all artists seek to do, whether consciously or unconsciously, is create a situation where the viewer is compelled to become engaged with the art? Lehrer writes that Cézanne's epiphany was that our brains require interpretation. To look is to create what you see, which is why we all see it differently. Let me digress for a minute and talk brain science in my non-scientific way. What neuroscience now knows about vision is the input of photons on our retinas is only the beginning of how we see. And those photons are just vague impressions at first. The photons take two different paths to the visual cortex. One is fast, one is slow. The slow path analyzes and refines the inputs of light, and it begins doctoring the data. Form is imposed onto the photons that took the fast path. The outside world is forced to conform to our expectations. If these interpretations are removed, our reality becomes unrecognizable. The light just isn't enough. Modern neuroscientific studies of the visual cortex have confirmed the intuitions of Cézanne that the mind will fill in the details. As the traces of light are processed through the 5 areas of the visual cortex, the visual scene is built. Reality is continually refined until the original sensation, that incomplete canvas, is swallowed by our subjectivity. We could not consciously see without our imagination to put it all together. To me, this gets at the heart of what abstraction is all about. So as an amateur reader of brain science, this really intrigues me, and I wanted to explore it somehow in my images. How much information do I need to include? How much can the viewer fill in? And this has evolved for me into other questions more related to photographic convention. Is it necessary to resolve the composition within the frame? Or might imaginary lines extend past the border, sometimes to an obvious imagined completion, other times to a more ambiguous one? In fact, does there need to be an edge, a border at all? My process for making these images has been to take an Illumitones collage that I never resolved, I never completed, and start pulling it apart, removing element after element, and seeing how little I needed. And I was working with the guideline in my head, less is more, and I would keep removing how little would carry an image. Sometimes simplicity would win out. Other times I still had a more complicated image in the end. But this is a direction I want to continue to explore. And the result thus far is a series of images, a subset of Illumitones that I call reductions. And the CPA exhibition is the first time that the world has seen them.